the impact of the coronavirus epidemic on education in Wales. I'm very pleased to welcome Kirsty Williams AM, Minister for Education, Steve Davis, Director of the Education Directorate, and Hugh Morris, who is Group Director, Skills, Higher Education and Lifelong Learning. Can I welcome you all and thank you for attending. Minister, I understand you'd like to make a short opening statement.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and indeed, if I could just begin by once again putting on the record my gratitude to everyone who is helping us get through this pandemic. There are a vast number of people who are keeping our school hubs open, looking after vulnerable children and the children of key workers. Because of them and their efforts, those key workers are able to carry on their critical roles in responding to COVID-19. I am extremely proud of the way that members of the school community have gone above and beyond. They have kept their schools open out of hours, over the weekends, on bank holidays and Easter. And it is really heartening and humbling to see the way that they have responded to this crisis. And there are teachers, teaching assistants and many others who are helping our children and their parents to keep learning at home. I know that homeschooling isn't easy, so I want to say also thank you to parents and carers for their efforts at this time. By keeping their children at home, they are helping us to keep people safe and reducing pressure on our education system and on our NHS. Be in no doubt, we are facing many challenges because of this pandemic. My primary concern is, and always will be, the health and well-being of our children, of our young people, and of all the staff in our education settings. And I am very grateful to everyone who is supporting us in these endeavours. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr, and I'm now happy to answer questions that members of the committee may have this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I'm sure the committee echoes the heartfelt thanks you have just given then. The first questions we've got this afternoon are from Heaven David.
Good afternoon, Minister. With regard to your 5 principles which you set out today regarding when schools will reopen, they're very clear, but they require a judgment from you. So could you outline when you think that schools might reopen?
Thank you, Kevin. I'm very clear. Schools will move to a new phase because already schools are open for many, in many settings. We will move to a new phase when it is safe to do so, and when I have advice from the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Officer that it is safe to do so. I have made very clear in my statement that that is not imminent. I know that in some cases there have been speculation that a return to normal could be with us quite shortly. I'm clear that a return to normal is not imminent, and that therefore I'm not in a position to give a date as to when we will see more schools opening up to more children.
Have you been given any indication at all by the Chief Medical Officer as to when in the longer term it might be?
No, I have not been given a date. What I have done today is publish the principles that will aid me in, as you said, me making a decision. So clearly we will be relying on the advice of our medical and scientific advisors, but the principles are very clear. Firstly, we will need to consider any decision to have more children returning to school in the context of the safety, the physical and the emotional well-being of children, young people and the staff. Obviously, I can't make a decision regarding education in isolation. It will have to be taken in the context of the wider Welsh Government response to dealing with this pandemic. Thirdly, it is absolutely crucial in making any decisions that we have clearly communicated that to parents and to staff on the information that we have used to reach any decisions, to build confidence for parents and professionals, but also to give them time to plan. It will be impossible to move quickly to new ways of working. And we also have to look at, if we are, and it's been paraphrased quite a lot today, if we're looking at certain groups of children accessing more education within a school setting, how can we, which groups they should be? And finally, how do we operationalize that? How do we make those settings as safe as they possibly can be? And how do we tackle some of the difficult challenges of everything from ensuring that we have adequate number of workforce available to the very real questions about how you would do social distancing in the context of education, school transport issues, how you would advise people gathering at the school gate, for instance. So there are very practical issues that would need to be considered and thought through very, very carefully before we could return, what we could see is a move from where we are now to the next phase of education and to new approaches to what schooling may look like. But again, I must be absolutely clear to you, members of the committee, and to people watching, it is not feasible at this sense that we would move from where we are now to what all of us would regard as normal education and what the operation of schools looked like before the start of this pandemic. So
what's clear from what you said is that it's going to be a phased return. I would assume that would be the most vulnerable, perhaps ALN pupils would return first. Just reading some of the things that you've said today. Can you answer that question? Can I also ask, you've said that guiding principle number 3 will be having the confidence of parents, staff and students based on evidence information so they can plan ahead. What will that evidence and information be, and how will you know that you've got the confidence of parents to return?
Well, as I said, primarily we will need to take a lead from our scientific and medical advisors. I want to also say that we are obviously working on a 4 nations basis and keeping in very close contact with my counterparts in Northern Ireland, Scotland and England. But we're also looking beyond the United Kingdom to approaches to education in the face of this pandemic. Members are aware that we, as a nation, are a member of the Atlantic Rim Collaboratory. So recently I was able to talk to educationalists and ministers in Iceland, other parts of Europe, North America, South America and Australia. So we're also looking at best international evidence with this regard. And clearly we will need to be very clear, as is today, an attempt to be very clear with parents and our teaching professionals and the unions that represent them, the basis of that evidence.
Okay.
And can I just ask, with regard to the principles, do they then apply to further education and universities?
Well, of course, I think when we are discussing these challenges, then we are doing that with both our colleagues in the school sector, but also our colleagues in the FE sector. And we're in close contact with colleagues in higher education to share thinking on these matters.
But these principles don't apply to in those circumstances. These are principles for schools only.
These principles are applying to both, and our work in this area are applying to both schools and FE colleges. Clearly, universities as independent institutions, we wouldn't be able to dictate to, but I want to be absolutely clear. We are working with representatives of the HE sector to include them in this work. And I have received not assurances, but discussions that I've had with Universities Wales and Vice Chancellors that they are very keen to be kept appraised of these approaches because they may well wish to implement something similar within their own institutions.
Okay, I've got a couple of supplementaries now. Firstly from Susie Davis, and then I'm going to go to Sian Gwenllian. Susie? No, we can't hear Susie. Susie? No, I'll go to Sian then, and then I'll come back to Susie.
Yeah, I don't think
Sian?
my microphone is muted.
Iawn, na i ofyn fy nghwestiwn felly i Kirsty Williams. Mae'n amlwg fod unrhyw benderfyniadau sydd angen i gwneud ynglyn ag ail agor ysgolion yn gorfod cael ei gwneud yng nghyd-destun yr pethau eraill mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn gorfod meddwl amdanyn nhw. Ac mae'n hollol glir nad ydy dulliau profi y Llywodraeth wedi cael i datblygu'n ddigonol i ni fod hyd yn oed yn dechrau meddwl am godi cyfyngiadau. Ac felly, oni dydy o'n beth peryglus mewn gwirionedd i ddechrau trafod agor ysgolion pam da ni ddim wedi cael y profi yn iawn drwy drwch y boblogaeth. Ac oni dydy o'n rhoi neges gymysg yn bod ni'n dechrau slacio rhai o'r cyfyngiadau yma, lle mewn gwirionedd mae'r cyfyngiadau yn dal yna ac yn dal angen bod yna'n gadarn.
First of all, thank you very much, Sian, for that important question. Can I be absolutely clear, and I thought I had been pretty clear in answering Heaven David, we are not relaxing any of the restrictions with regards to education. As I said to Heaven, it is not imminent that we would see a further phase in the next stage of education here in Wales. What I have done today is to provide clarity on the nature of the principles that I would use when coming to any discussion. It is the responsibility of me as the Minister, and indeed of the wider government, to begin to think about planning for the future. But I have been absolutely clear, we are not moving to an imminent change in how education is operating at the moment. And I'm also very, very clear that should we be given the opportunity to see more children in our schools, I will only do that when it is safe for me to do so, when I've been advised by the CMO that I am able to do that, and we have given sufficient time and planning to the sector to respond. It is not going to be easy, and we will need to give them, as a sector, time to be able to adjust. But if I have not been clear enough, let me say it again. We are not relaxing any issues around schools at present, nor is that imminent.
Thank you. Susie, I think we can try going to you again now.
Thank you. Minister, in your consideration of introducing phased return to school in due course, have you taken into consideration how things like school absences are going to be managed? Because regardless of the amount of good work you do on messaging, there will still be some families that don't realise that going back to school is for their particular family. Will there be a relaxation of effectively what we would call truancy rules, or is that something that you get, that schools will be getting guidance on pretty much up front?
Thank you, Susie. As I said in my statement earlier today, returning to school will not be a return to normal. And in recognition of this, I've already made it clear that I will seek to reduce in all opportunities, reduce the burdens on school, and that includes various data collection, the suspension of performance measures, and removing the requirement to undertake literacy and numeracy testing. And clearly, school attendance will want to be an important factor of that.
Okay, thank you. I'm keen to go on now to talk about the current situation as being faced by our children and young people in schools, with some questions from Sian Gwenllian. Sian.
Ers ddoe, mae Llywodraeth Cymru wedi dechrau cyhoeddi ar data ynglyn â nifer o ysgolion sydd ar agor, nifer y plant sydd yn mynychu'r ysgolion a'r staff, ac wedi bod yn cyflwyno'r wybodaeth yma mesul fel canran o'r boblogaeth. A dwi'n credu na ar gyfartaledd tua 1% o blant Cymru sydd yn mynychu'r lleoliadau, tua 5% o'r staff. Fedrwch chi ddadansoddi'r ffigurau yna ymhellach? Fedrwch chi ddeutha ni faint o blant yn yr data yma sydd yn blant i weithwyr allweddol a faint sydd yn blant agored i niwed?
Thank you very much, Sian. As you quite rightly say, on average, we have 518 school hubs open each day with up to 4,200 children attending. We have seen an increase in the number of attendants since the start of what would have been the traditional summer term. We have approximately 5.6% of the teaching population working in those hubs, and at present 85% of the children who are attending are the children of key workers, the remainder being vulnerable children. So we are now averaging 600 vulnerable children per day. These are small numbers, but we have seen an increase in those numbers since the start of what would have been the traditional summer term.
Iawn, dwi'n siŵr byddwn ni'n dod yn ôl at y pwynt yna mewn ychydig. Faint felly o hyder sgynnoch chi bod y trefniadau yn effeithiol o ran diogelwch y staff a'r plant yn y lleoliadau hyn?
Thank you once again for that. The smooth operation of the hubs with regards to health and safety is of course of paramount importance. What we have seen since schools closed for traditional statutory purposes and moving to their repurposed function, we have seen a change in pattern over time. So following my announcement on the I believe 18th of March, the week after, we saw a large number of settings open and operating. As local authorities have been able to understand the demand for those places from critical workers and vulnerable children, we have seen more local authorities move to a hub model, and we have been able to publish guidance to local authorities on how issues around safe working in those hubs should be followed, and we've been able to give guidance in that regard. Local authorities are asked by us to report any incidents where they are concerned about operation issues on the ground.
Fel o'n i'n sôn yn gynharach, mae profi yn allweddol gyda delio hefo'r argyfwng yma. Faint o staff ysgol sydd wedi cael profion ar gyfer Covid honedig, oherwydd bod nhw wedi cael symptoma ac yn y blaen, a faint o'r rheini sydd wedi profi'n bositif?
My understanding from Public Health Wales is that 15 teachers have been tested for COVID-19, and I believe 2 of those results have come back as positive. Can I make it absolutely clear? The week before last, Welsh Government issued new guidance around who should be tested, and I want to make it absolutely clear to those professionals working in our hubs, if they or a member of their family are exhibiting any of the symptoms, however mild, of COVID-19, they can and they should be tested.
Iawn. A y cwestiwn ola gen i felly ar hyn ydy pa mor bwysig ydy yr profi yn mynd i fod rwan yn y cyfnod nesa wrth i chi ddechrau meddwl am lacio'r cyfyngiadau?
Obviously, the ability to be able to test, to trace and to quarantine will be critical to the next phase, and will be a very, very important and significant building block in all aspects of the government's work to respond to this pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Minister, and thank you, Sian. We've got some questions now on the impact on particular groups of children from Dawn Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from your answer to Sian Gweinidog earlier about the number of vulnerable children in school. What's been done specifically to facilitate more of those children coming into a school setting or hub at the moment? And I'm thinking about the 600 you've talked about, and I know in one of my local authority areas of Mae'r, which is a very small authority, we're talking about the number of children identified as vulnerable running into thousands, not hundreds, and that's just in one authority. So this is, this is a particularly difficult issue to address, I appreciate, but how are we going to get more of these children into the hubs?
Okay, Dawn. First thing to say is that the issue of vulnerable children attending settings is one that is a challenge to not just Wales, but also to my colleagues in Northern Ireland, Scotland and England. I am pleased to say that we are working across government departments, myself, obviously, and colleagues in education, with colleagues in social services to have a cross-government approach to these issues. I think the first thing to say is these are complex messages, because the overriding public health message from our government has been to stay at home. And children should be kept at home as much as possible, and to make sure that our hubs run smoothly, safely and effectively, we do need to limit the number of children who are attending those hubs. So firstly, the fact that numbers are small is in some ways a success of our public health messages, because parents have been heeding those messages. But of course, all of us will have concerns for some children who remain at home. So I'm pleased to say that we have seen a doubling in the last week of the number of children. So although numbers are small, they have doubled over the course of the last week. We are working with local authorities, and they have assured us that children and young people with a social worker have been risk assessed on a multi-agency basis and are receiving of support in a number of ways. And that includes having conversations about some of those children attending the hubs. They're also looking to support in other ways. Of course, for some of our children who would be classed as vulnerable, and our definition of vulnerable is one that is shared between the systems in England and Wales, could be children with a statement of special educational needs. For some of those children who perhaps have very intense health needs, actually staying at home is the appropriate thing for that child and that family to do. And we're looking to support families, and local authorities and local education systems are looking to support families in a number of ways. We also know that just because you don't have a social worker or a statement of special educational needs does not mean that a child may be vulnerable. And schools are very aware of the needs of those children and have been carrying out regular telephone check-ins where they can, if the age of the child is appropriate, just to keep in touch with those families and those individual children. But we will continue to work across government to encourage, where it is appropriate, children to attend settings. And if it is not appropriate for children to be in a setting, that there is contact with those children and young people to ensure that they remain and their families remain supported.
Thank you, Minister. And it's encouraging to hear you talk about the ongoing safeguarding of children that are at home. And I assume within that, appropriate referral mechanisms are still in place if teachers or anybody has any particular concern about a child. Similarly, with special educational needs, whereas some of those children benefit clearly from a one-to-one provision in a school, and they may not respond as well to remote working or remote contact with an SEN advisor. Are you considering in any way any relaxation of the lockdown rule in particular for those children in terms of them being able to access the support that they need for their particular educational needs?
Well, first of all, Dawn, you're absolutely right. And my expectation is that schools should remain in contact with children and continue to identify vulnerable children, and schools should continue to refer children to children's services if they have any concerns, and that would also of course be the case for youth workers who may be keeping in contact with children. So there is a professional expectation on all those that are working with our children and young people that despite the circumstances we find themselves in, that they should continue to report and refer cases if they see anything or hear or are told anything that makes them concerned about a child's welfare and safety. With regards to children with additional learning needs, I'm aware that that can present a number of challenges to families and children. And perhaps Steve Davis could give some further details. We have been keen to work with local authorities to ensure specialist provision where that is appropriate. So if I could give you an example of my own local authority in Powys, they have two specialist centres available for children with more profound additional learning needs, and those centres are available. Recognising, however, that even with the provision of specialist hubs, it can be a challenge for some children with additional learning needs to find themselves outside of a routine. Hubs are often staffed on a rota basis, and therefore children could be faced with a staff that they are unfamiliar with. So even when local authorities, and the vast majority of them do have specialist services in place, sometimes that might not be the best thing for a child's health and well-being. But perhaps Steve can give us some further details of the conversations that have been taking place with directors of education to ensure that children with additional learning needs have access to hubs and specialist support. Steve?
Yes, myself and colleague Albert Heaney, colleague director, have been in regular touch with directors of education and directors of social services to make sure these children and young people's needs are catered for. We are very aware of all of the special schools, profound and multiple learning difficulties, EBD schools, and pupil referral units that have been kept open in their own way, but also in some cases as hubs to deliver those services for those children's needs. And we're pleased that the directors and the local authorities have responded so constructively. So we have the details of every school that's open, the pupils who are attending, and we are clear that the risk assessments that the Minister referred to for children with special needs, as well as more wider vulnerable groups, are having risk assessments to make sure that where there is a need identified for a pupil that is not currently attending a hub, then the local authority can be working with that child and with the parents.
Thank you, Steve. Dawn?
Thank you. Just two more questions. One is around emotional and mental health difficulties being experienced by children and young people at the moment. Now, there was a very welcome announcement of £1.25 million for school counselling, but how is that in practical terms being applied if those children are not actually in school?
You're right, Dawn. We have to consider how we can support children not only in their learning during this time, but also to recognise the very real impact that the pandemic will have on all of our mental health and well-being. Recognising, of course, it is absolutely natural for all of us, including children and young people, to have fears and anxieties at this time. That's a natural reaction to the situation that we find ourselves in. But of course, there are issues around those children that would have currently been receiving school counselling and also being able to be in a position to respond to a potential growth in the number of children that are receiving support. So the additional money will be made available to local authorities to be able to increase and ramp up services to support children and families. In the immediacy, of course, that will have to be done in different ways than perhaps we've traditionally delivered services in the past because of social distancing and lockdown rules. But we want to get some of this these systems in place now, rather than waiting for everything to go back to normal. We need to be able to plan to offer services in the here and now, but also be able to plan for what potentially could be an increase in the demand of those services. So we've been in close touch with local authorities, asking them what they believe that they will need and how they can use additional financial resources. And we've been very pleased to be able to secure that for them.
So that would include things like telephone and video support as well, I guess, then? Yes,
absolutely. So that would include remote counselling as in the fashion that we're doing now, but also as and when some of the restrictions are perhaps removed, looking at an enhanced family therapy or a therapy approach. So when we talk about counselling, I think it's important to recognise that there will be some flexibility around this money, and it does not necessarily mean that local authorities have to use it on a one-to-one basis. That might not be appropriate for some children, especially our younger children and their families, and they can use that money to provide counselling or therapy in the widest possible terms that is the best method to support individual children and their families. But clearly we're having to do that in the confines of lockdown and social distancing at the moment. Some of that money can also be used to support the professional learning and the professional development of counsellors, because of course they may be being asked to work in a different way, and we need to make sure that they have the appropriate skills and abilities to do that.
Thank you. Thank
Dawn,
you,
before you ask you a final question, I've got a couple of supplementaries. Sure. Firstly from Susie and then from Heaven.
Thank you. My question goes back to the comment you made earlier, Minister, about the number of children doubling, vulnerable children doubling after the Easter break, if we can call it that. So what I'm after is a sense of churn in these establishments. So was that figure a recovery of a number of children that had been there before the Easter break? And are the people who are there still the same people as were there right at the beginning of the crisis and the lockdown?
Susie, what I believe that we're seeing in our schools is new pupils coming into school. So there has been, I know, a real effort on behalf of educationalists and social services staff to really reach out to families and to make sure that they're aware of the support that is available out there for them and their children, and to be able to give them the confidence that there are things that, that the hubs are available for them. So we have seen an increase in children. Those numbers are still small. And I believe, potentially there is an opportunity to build on that and to have further conversations with families about the support that is available for vulnerable children. Whether that, and that vulnerability, of course, can cover a whole range of issues. And as I said when we last met, this is a constantly evolving situation. The initial response, local authorities and schools worked incredibly fast and incredibly quickly to set up these hubs. We've seen an evolution in the weeks since that time, and I am sure that we will continue to see some evolution in approaches.
Okay, thank you. Heaven, you had a supplementary briefly, please.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I've been listening to the answers with regard to vulnerable children and following on from that answer. I mean, I'm at home with a vulnerable child, a child who's got additional learning needs. She's got autism, she's 4. I imagine there are many, many parents in exactly the same position. I've heard from them. I haven't heard anything from schools, from the school, from a local authority. Should I have heard something, or should I be proactive in pursuing it?
Well, I don't want to comment on personal cases.
But there are many others in this position.
But what I would say is, if parents have concerns and want to have a conversation about what support is available to them and their children, they should contact their local education authority to have a conversation as to what support is available.
Okay, thank you. Dawn, final question, please.
Yeah, my last question is really about the potential for the attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and their more affluent peers. Is that a concern for you? And I'm thinking particularly in relation to those the less affluent families that having access to technology and so on. What kind of concerns do you have about that, and what are we looking to do to try to ensure that doesn't actually play out?
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. All the statistics would tell us that learning loss and the gap potentially will affect those more vulnerable children the most. And clearly, we will want to consider that as we think about what the new normal for education may look like, or as we develop into future phases. Depending on where that child is in their educational journey, of course, the needs and the potential for loss is slightly different. So, for instance, when we're thinking about very young children, we could be thinking about, a lack of social interaction, the development of oracy skills, and of course that potentially then will have a knock-on to their ability to learn to read and then on to write, for instance. For other children who are perhaps older and heading towards formal examinations, then the challenge when they return to school will be a slightly different one. I'm not sure, Chair, if you want me to give some further details about our continuity of learning plan and how we are looking to address digital disadvantage now, or whether there are questions later.
I've got a question on that coming up, so if it's okay, Dawn, we'll go on to that now. Before we do that, I was just going to ask how the Welsh Government is paying due regard to the UNCRC and obviously the right children and young people have to an education. And I was going to ask you about the risk of inequality due to varying access to digital resources, which are so important in ensuring continuity of learning.
You're absolutely correct, Chair, and officials are very aware of our responsibilities towards children's rights in this regard, and doing whatever we can to ensure that children have an equal opportunity and have equal access to learning at this time. We are fortunate in the regard that because of previous decisions and investments, we have a strong base on which to build because we have our Hub digital learning platform. Because we have invested heavily in a national purchasing of Microsoft Office and Google Education tools, which are available to all families. We have become the first, I think we're about certainly first in the UK. I'm not sure if we're the first across the world. I think we probably are, to deploy, for instance, Adobe Spark nationally. But obviously access to hardware and connectivity is crucial at this time, and officials are working with local authorities to ensure that all children have access to both the hardware and the connectivity they need to be able to participate in digital learning at this particular time.
Okay, thank you. And just a final question from me. How exactly are we communicating to parents what the expectations are of them in terms of delivering this education at home now? Are there, for example, guidelines on recommended hours of home learning per day of week or volume of work to be completed? How are we ensuring that parents know how best to lead their children through this at the moment?
Well, firstly, can I recognise what a challenge this is? We've just heard from Heaven, who is carrying on his day job as the Assembly member, but is obviously trying to do that as well as care for and provide learning for his children. And I know, Chair, that you're doing the same, and I'm certainly trying to do the same, and it's a real challenge. It's not easy. As part of our Stay Safe, Stay Learning policy statement, advice is available to parents and carers on the Hub platform as to what they best can do to support their children. I think the really important message that I've been trying to give to parents is not to be too hard on ourselves. I know that everybody is doing the best that they can in really challenging circumstances. And if they have concerns, they should be in contact with their child's school. But we do have specific advice and guidance to parents on the Hub platform.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on now to some questions on examinations from Janet Finch-Saunders. No, Janet, we can't hear you. I tell you what, Janet, do you want to try again? No. Okay, we'll go on then to questions on higher education and post-16, and we'll come back to examinations if that's okay. Susie?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Before we leave continuity of learning, do you mind if I just ask this one question? No,
that's fine. Yes, go on.
It's your comment, Minister, on working with local authorities to make sure that individuals have hardware. Can you just give us a bit of detail on what working with the local authorities actually means? And in the process of that, is there any data gathering going on for those pupils who are being educated at home and the levels at which they're engaging? You know, are they sticking with it, or how many are dropping out? Because I think the two of those perhaps go together.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm hoping to make an announcement tomorrow, if not later on this week, about some specific details around support for hardware and connectivity. And we're working closely with local authorities to understand just that, understand from their schools, the number of schools, and a number of them have already done this, have been lending Chromebooks, iPads, laptops to children, and also identifying children who are not perhaps engaging in the activities that have been made available. And we'll be doing two things to support local authorities. The first is to use the stock of equipment that they already have to be able to provide hardware to students. So we have purchased on a national basis software which, when applied to an old piece of kit, essentially turns it into a out-of-the-box Chromebook. Because as you can imagine, just like other things during a pandemic, there has been a rush to buy new stuff on the market, and then there is a scramble and nobody can get what they need. So we're utilising kit that is already available in schools and local authorities, and we will look to backfill that to schools at a later point out of our EdTech investment programme. The other issue is, once we have a child has a Chromebook or a laptop or a device, issues around connectivity. So we're also looking to purchase on a national level and distribute MiFi connectivity. So students will be able to have access to Wi-Fi where they don't have that already. Now, that's why we need to work closely with local authorities and schools to identify the level of that need and to make sure the stuff gets to the right children. And one of the ways in which we are able to do that is to look at engagement in education. So if a child hasn't been engaging, is that because they just don't want to? And they are voting with their feet, but clearly that needs to have a conversation. Teachers need to have a conversation about that. Or is that because the child simply does not have the ability to do that, and therefore we need to get that stuff out to that children? So rather than just simply leaving it to local authorities to scramble around in a very crowded market to get the stuff that they need, we're trying to do that on a national basis and deploy that to local authorities. So our officials have been having conversations with each of our local authorities to ascertain, what's already happened. And there is very good practice out there. Schools have been proactive, but where there are gaps, what can we do as a national government to be able to assist them to do that? And we are repurposing some of the resources that we had previously identified for our EdTech investment, using those resources to fill this particular gap.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go back to Janet now. I believe we've got sound again, so Janet can ask her questions on examinations. Janet.
Thank you. I thought it was something at this end. I'm glad to hear it wasn't. When will all vocational learners know what is happening with their assessments? And how will those who have no choice but to wait for a vocational assessment be supported?
Okay, that's a very good question, Janet, because I know that there has been some concern and anxiety around vocational qualification students and how quickly we've been able to provide certainty for them. You'll be aware that Qualifications Wales have been able in the last week to be able to give that greater clarity. So they have announced that learners due to complete their Essential Skills Wales qualifications will receive results. And they have also published their approach to how health and social care qualifications will be managed, because of course those are part of the first set of reformed quals that we have done on a Wales basis. You are right, there are a group of students which fall into the category where they are technical qualifications that require a certificate of competency to be industry ready. I hope I've explained that correctly. And therefore we are working to understand how we can accommodate those students in these particular circumstances. But at this stage, there may be some delay for that element of their qualification being delayed to a further date.
Thank you.
Janet?
Yeah, what are your expectations for how A-level and GCSE qualifications will be awarded this summer, following the ministerial direction that you have issued to Qualifications Wales? For example, how is an appropriate balance being taken between recognising the progress of pupils in their casework, in their coursework, mock examinations and other work to date, and also the potential of pupils who might have performed particularly well in their examinations this summer?
Well, Janet, I understand, and today is a day where some students would have been undertaking practical examinations. I understand how devastating it has been to both students and teachers alike for the decision to take I had to take to cancel this summer's exam series. But I'm absolutely clear that was the only decision that could have been reached. Qualifications Wales has made it very clear, and for people who would like more information, I would urge them to look at Qualification Wales's website, how they will go about giving and allocating and awarding a grade to our A-level and GCSE students. Firstly, teachers will be asked to submit a grade they believe that student would have obtained should they have taken an exam. And of course, teachers will have a range of data and their own professional judgment that they will use in awarding that grade. Teachers will also be asked to rank students in order. Once that information has been submitted to Qualifications Wales, there will be a process by which that data will be moderated from centre to centre and across the nation, thus giving us the chance to award a student a fair grade whilst being and remaining true to ensuring that we have a robust qualifications system, and allowing those students who find themselves at a critical stage of their education where they are looking to move on to next stages, that they will have the grades that will allow them to make decisions about their future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. We're going to go on now then to the questions on higher and further education from Susie Davis. Susie.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose my first question just goes back to the 16-year-olds at the moment and those who are looking forward to either going to college, the older ones going to university, there'll be apprenticeships, all kinds of future pathways for post-16. What's happening either at school level or even at college level to get those students ready for the next steps? Because obviously they're not in their usual environments and getting their usual programme of teaching.
No, that's quite right, Susie. And I should have said in answer to Janet's question as well, I'm sure people already know, but just to get the point across, that A-level results day and GCSE days will run as normal across not just Wales, but across England, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is really important. You're right, Susie. For those people that are coming to the end of one part of their education, this is a particularly challenging time. You'll be aware that last week on Hub, we were able to launch a programme for Year 13 students to help them get ready for university. I'm very grateful to the HE sector in Wales who've worked really hard with us on that. So for instance, if you were a Year 13 student or even a Year 12 student that was thinking about or are interested in areas around social policy, you could have tuned into a social policy lecturer at Swansea University. If you go to the Hub website, you will be able to see that there are subject listings, everything from animal science through to law, politics, history and science, with then links through to higher education and further education courses which students can avail themselves of. There's also a section on preparation for essential study skills. So whether that is report writing or academic writing, so there is a range of activities and courses available for Year 13 so that children, they're all children to me, young people can get themselves, they don't have to stop learning and they can get themselves ready for the next stage of their education. And again, for those children perhaps who are coming to the end of their GCSEs, again, there is a range of information either within their own schools or on their own within their local colleges about things that can keep them learning. So for instance, I'm aware of one school, you can go onto the website and there are recommendations of, for instance, what you could be reading over the summer if you're interested in doing this particular A-level in September. And I know that there are also moves in schools and in colleges to be able to make sure that those children don't miss out on really important careers advice at this time as well, and information so they can make informed decisions. And I know that people are working hard to link up children to advice services that are available so that they can make those really important future decisions, with the advice of either a teacher or other professional, so that they've got those options. So there is material out there, and it's growing all the time. This week we were able to launch our virtual Seren network. You'll be aware that for the last couple of years we've been able to send Welsh children to the Yale Global Summer School. Clearly that can't happen this year. That's devastating for those Year 12s that had worked so hard and had won a place on that programme. They will now be able to attend the Yale Global Scholars Programme virtually and remotely, because Yale have moved that programme online. So we're developing materials and resources all of the time.
Well, thank you for that answer. Before I move on to my next question, can you give me some sort of sense of how that Hub domain is being populated? Where's all this information being sourced from? I mean, presumably, they'll be working with partners, but what does that look like?
Oh my goodness! Yes, absolutely. We're working very hard. So everything from our work with the BBC, for instance, and BBC Bite Size, through to our FE colleges, and our HE institutions, as well as other organisations in the third sector who are looking to provide those opportunities. Can I just say that last week we are looking every day in the region of well over 150,000 logins a day onto Hub.
Well, that's great. But so there's proactive populating of Hub. That's what I was after. That's great. We're just going back to some of Janet's questions and the assessed grades. I want to talk to you about the unconditional offers and where we are with that at the moment for entering universities, because there's going to be a scramble now for the available students from all some further education, but primarily higher education institutions across the UK. Is the moratorium on unconditional offers still standing? Are there conversations going on to extend that moratorium? Otherwise, this scramble is going to potentially negatively affect our universities quite considerably.
Yes, you'll be aware that a moratorium does exist. It exists in this current context to the 1st of May, and we continue to keep in close touch with colleagues in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and in the Westminster government around these issues. Officials are also in touch with UCAS, and in the last couple of days, I've had at least 3 meetings with representatives of the Welsh higher education sector to discuss these matters.
I just want to ask you now about students and their maintenance loan grants. Now, I think they're getting around now the money going into their bank account that they would have normally expected at this time of year. That's right, yeah?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. What's happening to those students who would normally be living in Dig somewhere, but are now living at home? Are they likely to be asked for some sort of to reimburse part of the cost, because obviously it's not as expensive to live at home as away? And what's likely to be happening with the maintenance loans over the summer holiday period potentially? Because we've had a period now where students can't top up their maintenance loans by going out and doing, working on weekends or working in the evenings or whatever. So their income has been impacted. Just sort of in the round, what kind of conversations are happening around that? Again, it's probably a 4-nation approach, I would imagine, but.
Thank you, Susie. So you are correct to say that our student support regime does allow for a lower payment to be made to those students that stay at home during their studies. But I want to reassure students that there will be no change to their student support payments just because they have left their universities and have decided to go home. There should be no change, and also we are continuing, it should be important to say, we are also continuing to pay education maintenance allowance at this time for our FE students that are eligible for that, even though obviously for EMA there is an attendance requirement, but clearly that is not appropriate to enforce at the moment. You are correct, this is a worrying time for many students in higher education, especially for those who are looking to graduate at this time and are going out into an economy that has been tremendously badly hit by the pandemic. At this time, we continue to have conversations with NUS Wales about what can be done within a Welsh context, but as you quite rightly say, also within a UK context to support students who may have been affected. We are continuing on our webpage to have a frequently asked questions section that advises students in the first instance, especially when it comes, for instance, to the cost of accommodation, to have those discussions. And I'm very grateful that in some cases, some of our institutions have been able to waive or partially waive accommodation fees where students have vacated their accommodation and have returned to their usual home address. But we will continue to have dialogue with NUS Wales and with our counterparts across the country to look to see what more we can do to support students at this time.
Thank you for that, Anson. Yes, I was pleased to see that announcement through the NUS as well. So well done to those accommodation providers who've got a heart. I think we'll all have seen the Universities UK document, which explains some of the difficulties that they're going to be running into if this proceeds much further. And my understanding is that the main emphasis at the moment is to try and get all the universities across the UK through this initial period of difficulty by releasing as much money as possible. I can see that your figure to HEFCU was a little bit down on last year's letter, not that there's been a remit letter yet, but indication. Are you releasing that money earlier so that they can use it more swiftly, or does that not matter?
Before you come in, Minister, that is going to have to be the last question. So just to make you aware of that, because we are coming up to the end of our time.
Okay, that's fine.
Of course, Susie. We are working closely with Universities Wales and have a lot of sympathy for the proposals that have come forward from Universities UK, which Wales universities we've been part of forming. Stability in the first instance is really important to us, which is why we've been able to give an indication to HEFCW about resources that are available. And we've been very clear to HEFCW that we want to be as flexible as possible in how they use those resources to support institutions. And if that means and that potentially would mean reprofiling the way in which money gets out to institutions. But clearly we will need to have an ongoing discussion about how we respond to the immediacy of the issues facing HE, how we can get stability for the next academic year, and how we then can support the sector through what is a really challenging time for them. And we will do that in a Welsh context, and we will continue to do that also in a UK context, because you will have seen the scale of some of the figures that have been talked about in terms of the impact on the HE sector at this time. And clearly a four-nation approach to that will be crucial.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have come to the end of our time, and anything that we didn't ask, we will have to write to the Minister. Can I just thank the Minister and your officials for your attendance today. We know how busy you are dealing